Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Beyond Bitcoin, a show about what is not really focused on Bitcoin because the industry is growing at such a rapid rate outside Bitcoin. No doubt we'll use the name on the way through. Of course, we can't avoid it, but there we go. And always with me on the show is my friend and colleague, Nitin Gower. Hello, Nitin.
Hey, Derek. Good to be here again. My name is Nitin. I serve as Director of Financial Sciences and Digital Assets at IBM. I'm also the CTO at Portal Asset Management, working with Derek. Glad to be here again, Derek.
Terrific. Hey, we've got a special guest today, which is excellent. And our guest today is Maurício Magaldi. And Maurício is the host of BlockDrops Podcast, which, get in and have a listen to that. It's 5-minute segments he does every single week with his perspective and discussions around use cases. And he does it in both Portuguese and English. I'm not quite sure how many we might have listening today in Portuguese, but those that do speak the language, there's your opportunity to have a listen around that space too. But what's important is that what we try to do here at Beyond Bitcoin is not just get perspective of what's happening in the industry as a whole, and perspective of how this is changing culture, but perspective of how digital assets and cryptocurrencies, non-fungible tokens, alternative banking systems are going to affect different countries in the world and how those cultures are adapting or entertaining this particular space. And so today we're very lucky to be able to have Maurício be able to talk to us about Brazil and how Brazil as a developing country is looking at this particular space and how they're taking it on and adapting the opportunities there. Because one has to realize that the developed worlds tend to be the developers of this space. They're the ones that are putting in the $18 billion of venture capital over the last 6 months. They're putting it in what the old mining terms used to call spades and hammers and equipment. But the people that are starting to use it very quickly are the developing world. And so we know that the number 1 user in the world is actually Vietnam, and the number 20 user in the world is Afghanistan. Interestingly enough, the 14th most user of the world is in fact Brazil. So we're really keen to hear what your perspectives are, Maurício.
All right. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Nitin. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It's interesting to participate in podcasts that we listen to. So I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. So yeah, Brazil is a huge country. We are over 220 million Brazilians. So it's a massive country with massive gaps in social economic space. We have over 20 million people under the poverty line, which is only more complicated because of the pandemic. But there's a lot of thriving industries as well. I've been in banking for most of my career, and that's sort of the perspective that I carry. We have probably 42% of the economic active population is banked. The rest isn't. So there's a huge space as well there. But the crypto thing really caught up into some circles, and we do have a big number of exchanges in Brazil. The startup market is very active. There's a lot of international money flowing into startups of all kinds, be it fintechs, crypto, and whatnot. So there's a huge influx of international money for that space as well. And we do have a very engaging central bank. So there's a number of new regulations in the recent years, a number of big projects. We're now halfway into open banking implementation in the marketplace. We do have one of the most modern instant payment systems, which is not blockchain based. And we're aiming next year towards starting the proof of concept on the digital real, which is the version of the CBDC for the country. So this is the broad space. There are a number of startups doing blockchain applications outside of crypto, outside of the digital asset space. So there's like active work on resolving social differences, opening up the space for ESG. ESG is a big thing in Brazil, environment, social governance pillar. Many companies are pushing towards that because the market is actually requiring the companies. We're a very export-based country, right? We send out a lot of our produce everywhere, so this has increasingly becoming a topic and a requirement. Now you can ensure that with blockchain, so the companies are pursuing that. So there's a number of use cases that we can explore here that fall a little bit outside of the digital space, but also there's a lot of crypto and digital asset incoming in Brazil. It's a very active market in that space as well.
Got it. Hey, Mauricio, first of all, really glad to have you on the show. I know for the audiences, Mauricio and me have worked both for IBM when we started the entire blockchain journey. Mauricio was leading the entire country of Brazil as a services lead for us and done some amazing work. We both have visited central bank in Brasilia and done a lot of work with the banking ecosystem. So really glad to have you here. A few things that we're trying to do in this show, and again, as a reminder, this is information discussion, certainly not investment advice for the audiences, but few things that we like to and the reason why we're trying to go global is getting perspectives of different parts of the world. We'll eventually go to India and Vietnam and go into various parts of the world and collect the on-the-ground data to bring this perspective. And one thing that blockchain and crypto industry does really well, as an evidence, is truly democratize, not just finance but banking and give voice to artists and give sort of open up a whole, just the subcultures that's evolving. And love to sort of get your point of view. And in preparation for this, Mauricio, I will confess I did some research and looked into this, which some of the stats is super interesting, is the fact that it's a country of contrast, right? It's the biggest economy, the biggest country in Latin America, 25% of population under poverty line, which is interesting for a large economy because it has the ability to grow massively, a lot of natural resources. 92% of Brazilian crypto users are male. And regardless of the gender, 40% of the crypto holders are between 20 and 25 years old. So there's a whole demographic that's emerging that we've seen that trend globally. I've seen that when we have folks from India and Vietnam, we'll see, at least from the research that we looked into this whole thing. And 31 to 40, you'll find a tapering statistics to say as generation gets older, they're not big into crypto, but the younger generation is a believer, which to me is a global phenomenon. So I'd just like to get your perspective. Is this just about having an alternative income source and having an avenue to break free from the traditional job-based model to say, hey, this is an avenue that we look at, which is what I have, at least from my research, and we'll get the on the ground reality from India later? Or this is more than that, from a perspective of uplifting a nation that has a lot of potential?
Right. So I think one of the things that I find in blockchain in general, crypto and blockchain in general, is the sense of community. Like if you see the most recent projects, say on top of Solana, they are heavily invested in the community. I had the chance to speak with Michael Wagner from Star Atlas on my podcast, and he's really engaged. I mean, who am I in the world of blockchain? And I got 35 minutes off of the most hyped CEO in the Solana space to speak with us. So they are really engaged in the community, and I think this is one of the things that attract Brazilians the most. We are a social country, right? You've been here a few times. You know that we like to party, we like to be together. Of course, with the pandemic, there was a big hit on that regard, but this is the nature of our culture, and I think because we have the Discord channels, we have the Telegram channels that everybody can sort of come together and discuss about what's happening, how, especially in the crypto space, where I made this amount of money. I'm farming tokens in this DeFi protocol. You guys should jump in on it. So I think there's this social component in our space, the collaboration, the community, that sort of drives, and this sort of age range you mentioned are the more socially active range, because it's like young adults that are trying to find something new, something unique, and they meet like-minded individuals. And of course, as we grow old, as I am growing old steadily for a few years now, we are seeing less and less adoption, because then it's like the old ways and stuff. But there's one interesting indicator. Last week, an 82-year-old woman bought 20% of a real estate on an NFT. in Brazil. So yes, this is
real estate as in real estate, not the
real
virtual real
estate.
estate. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
They fraction in a few NFTs, and the lady bought using the app, and that was like formal transaction recorded on chain with a Brazilian startup. So it's, of course, this is an outlier. It's just for the sake of the example, but yes, we are seeing a lot of activity, and we have I think we're at around 14% unemployment in Brazil at this point. So yes, there's lack of jobs for sort of the underqualified. So there are ways within the crypto space or the digital asset space to find revenue outside of regular 9 to 5 jobs that doesn't exist. So I think that's another way of seeing this phenomenon.
No, that's interesting. Now, so second thing is just to provide a trend which puts Brazil in perspective, right? So we looked at El Salvador, which was a famed use case because Bukele decided to make this a legal tender, and they had reasons for it. There's $400 million flowing in from North America or United States into El Salvador, and 8% of that goes away. It takes 2 days, and Bukele essentially said that, look, if we use Bitcoin or Lightning Network, which is the company that's building the wallet structures for them. And I think what's interesting also, Derek, is they've made some investment into Bitcoin, and they have made about 40 million of that investment, which I don't think any country can talk about revenue growth purely based on the Bitcoin investment the country treasury has made. Whether it's right or wrong, that's for the time and other people to decide. But if you look at Colombia and Argentina, the explosion of interest in crypto is from retail traders, from exchanges, to crypto as an investment, which is the challenge with Argentina, given the situation with currencies, looking into remittances tools, store of value, as a common thematic element of the economies that are struggling with the rates at which the currencies are sort of going awry, right? And so from that perspective, I think it was you who told me when I was visiting Brazil. I've been to Brazil many times, of course, enjoy the food, enjoy the people, and definitely enjoy the nature that Brazil has to offer. And I think it was you, I remember, over dinner telling me that we're not angry at our politicians being corrupt. We are angry at them being stupid, in the sense that this is the time when you would find a lot of politicians being caught at the. And I just want to understand the space, because that distrust in El Salvador, and even today after Bitcoin being a legal tender against the government and the runaway currency situation and everything else. Do you see that still being the case with reais? Reais having lost a lot of significant, value, with USD, and is dollar being is crypto being seen as a store of value, as the investment instrument, as a hedge against the inflationary challenges? Is all that economic underplay, or is this something more than that?
I think there's a little bit of both. I think, yeah, we're known for having hyperinflation for the longest time, right? I mean, probably more than half of my life, I've been under hyperinflation. Only the recent years after the Plano Real, which is the economic plan that turned around the economy in Brazil in '94, then it changed, and we've seen a lot of progress. But now we're back to annual 2-digit inflation, which is a bad indicator for us for the timing. Yes, we were one of the countries with the currencies that got most devalued against the dollar. So having other forms of assets that can protect us from both the inflation and the devaluation is important. So there is a movement towards that. As far as politicians go, I think the statement still stands. It's only gotten worse. We have proof. It's everywhere in the news. So I don't think we need to get into that. But I think because we are sort of approaching what would be the epitome of a kakistocracy, which is like the idiots running the place, it's how can I be protected against the mismanagement? And crypto gave the young adults a way out, right? So I don't know anyone in the whole industry, and of course I'm connected within a specific bubble, social and economic bubble, because I'm in banking, because I'm in Sao Paulo and all that. But everybody has either crypto on their portfolio or they're trying to get in. So it's not like this is like no, this is not for me. Everyone is pursuing this, and that is also true for companies. I mean, when we started off like 16, 17, we went to speak to companies and we spoke about blockchain, and they said, I don't want Bitcoin. This is strange, exotic. I don't want to touch that. Now, the serious companies are exploring blockchain in many avenues, be it crypto, be it efficiency, be it trustworthiness, traceability, what have you. So this is actively changing, and because things are not going to get any more cheaper for us in Brazil, we have to find ways around it. And I think being on crypto means more freedom for the individuals who can't afford losing more value of their money from the inflation and from the dollar devaluation. It's a certain way out. And we're seeing this in a lot of countries, right?
Yeah.
Along the way,
go ahead.
So along the way, we've talked about the concept of disintermediation of wealth, haven't we, of recent times, Nitin? And the inability for a certain socioeconomic sector, age, and also wealth to adapt to incoming technologies and incoming ways of doing business. And some great examples of that, of course, is the head of Berkshire Hathaway, refers to as Bitcoin as rat poison squared. However, this is a man that doesn't know how to use an iPhone. And so despite the fact he's an extraordinary investor in the traditional market, not necessarily an extraordinary investor in this market, clearly an example of not being able to adapt. Jamie Dimon's constant comment, Bitcoin is of no value. Who cares anymore, frankly? He's irrelevant in this space. And that's intriguing. Now, what you're saying to me there is that the generation that's coming, the generation that's here, the younger generation, the 2020, they're the ones that are holding Bitcoin. They're the ones that are trading in digital assets. They're the ones that are avoiding hyperinflation. They're the ones that are building their own asset portfolio of global assets. Interesting, hey? I mean, what that might mean is that they're the ones that the shift of wealth is starting to occur and move to them. And that means that generation, as they come forward, aren't going to be relying upon both the infrastructure of the government, the cryptocracy, as you say, of the government's chaos. They're beating their own path. So that must create a solid degree of enthusiasm and a very competent and tight-knit community that's getting developed there in Brazil. Do you think that's going to be shared and broader sections of the populace are going to start to understand what the opportunities are there?
I hope that happens, because that's one of the goals of the podcast, is to actually educate whoever is uneducated in the space, and maybe they will have the epiphany we had a few years ago and say, oh, this is the future. Well, this is the present, and this is my future. So I think that is bound to happen. One number that really strikes me from Brazil is that we have 3.7 million investors in the regular stock exchange, and one single crypto exchange in Brazil has 3 million.
Wow.
So if you count all
Mercado,
of the 12, 14, Mercado Bitcoin, yes.
Mercado Bitcoin, okay.
Yeah.
And so what's
in
around for?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. How long the exchange has been around for?
I think Mercado Bitcoin has already 10 years, maybe a little less.
Wow.
But yeah, they started off with like a computer, like a desktop on a table. And now they're this huge exchange everywhere. They have a tokenization company, which is Mercado Bitcoin Digital Assets. They have a digital custody company. They belong to one of the largest investment groups in Brazil, which is 2TM. 2TM is to the moon. And they're very active promoting education. They have the Blockchain Academy school.
That's right. Yeah. That's the recently
they're really sort of fomenting the critical mass, and the way. And I had the pleasure of interviewing the CEO Reinaldo Rabelo at the show at the BlockDrops.
Awesome. Yeah.
And one thing that really got me there is that I was, I come from the enterprise side of things, and we're slowly merging, which is beautiful. But I come from that space. I'm from banking and from enterprise technology and all that. And then I had him on the show because we go a while back. So I think I met him in 2011 maybe, and it was weird. I'm going to have the crypto guy on my show. It doesn't really make sense, but if I don't have him over, I'll never know. So that's when it struck me that the exchanges in Brazil, they see blockchain as a de facto financial markets infrastructure. And that changed my mind completely, because that means that, as you said, Nitin, we're getting into the real democratization of financial independence. And that in a country like ours is gold or Bitcoin.
Yeah. So what's also
Better
interesting
than
is central bank has reported that Brazilians have bought over $4 billion worth of cryptocurrencies in the country. There's a monthly number of $350 million of cryptocurrencies each month since January. So, and this is again, so two things that I think Mercado Bitcoin is doing right is, one, providing an avenue and access and an on-ramp, as that's a favorite term that Derek keeps reminding. There's a lot of on-ramps to the traditional banking system. But also, I think acquiring the Blockchain Academy, the largest crypto school in Brazil, is a positive sign that it's not just about making money and having more transaction volume. It's about educating more and more people and having them more aware, which I think is such a positive thing. I think Coinbase in the US have done the same thing. When you have a new token as a way to doing something, an airdrop, they give you tokens for going through certain programs to learn a few things, and then you get a few tokens to socialize with those, to create even a small portfolio from that perspective. Moving to regulation, and I think that's interesting because two kinds, right? If you look at US, there's a spree of inaction. Like no one wants to do anything, and they want to apply the same regulation. That we are always this contentious relationship to say, why don't you try to understand the space instead of just throwing regulatory books at us? And that is pervasive in advanced economies. The thing like, look, we got to protect this walled garden. We got to protect this existing financial system, no matter how broken and how inefficient it is. And then you have the corrupt economies that I have worked with some of the countries, and the country shall remain unnamed. There's a lip service, no one wants to do anything else, and they like, let's go and build this from POC perspective or proof of concept perspective. But surprisingly enough, in Brazil, at the time, the work that we have done, both the central bank and the SPB, which is the payment system, which by the way is one of the best in the world. It's really instant payment system, in Brazil, from a perspective of such a big country, 250 plus banks in the country. You guys have done a fantastic job from that perspective. Surprisingly enough, the big four have done technical work. The regulators are pro. They have talked about, in fact, we talk about ETF being a big deal in the US. I think early this year, Brazil has already passed ETFs. You've done that, 5 ETFs now, I think.
Wow.
So they've gone through all this stuff. They have, in March, the Securities and Exchange Commission also approved the, created by a Latin American investment firm called QR Capital, which I think was the first one, if I'm not mistaken. So they have gone through all those things, and they're saying, we've got to do something about. They introduced a bunch of bills. So to me, it looks like the regulators are progressive. They want to do something about it. The banking system is on board, which to me is an interesting dichotomy of the government maybe wanting to have inaction, the banking system, the regulators are proactive, the populace is all pro. So what gives? I mean, what the hell's going on? Why aren't you actually going to the moon?
Well, I think we are. It's just that it takes time because, as you mentioned, there's a huge socioeconomic gap in Brazil. Education is lacking even for those who are in the workforce. So it's a complicated mixture of things, of like ancient non-investing in education and then having people figure out what to do with crypto is a huge gap. But I think in Brazil, as much as in any other countries, and this is one thing that I've been pounding on it on the podcast, is that we'll cross the bridge of UX in crypto or blockchain, then it'll get massive adoption. Because if you tried in Brazil to say play Axie Infinity, you have to have 3 wallets. And every time you move from wallet to wallet, you pay something. So it's not conducive yet broadly for people to just jump into this. And this is what I think the Hallmark movement or Visa and MasterCard is doing is, okay, we're not going to be the infrastructure for the future financial markets because that's blockchain, but I'll make you easier on it. So I'll do the on-ramp and the off-ramp for you. And you go from your Apple Pay, you get my card on it, we'll transfer to crypto so you can use that in dollars. So I think this is something that is clearly happening. And I think that this will move the needle the UX is going to move the needle on the blockchain adoption everywhere, and also in the enterprise. So when it's easier to onboard and connect systems, that's also something I think is going to sort of unlock this massive opportunity. That said, what we are seeing in terms of influx in Brazil, in terms of international capital for the startup space, means that there's trust from the global markets that Brazil is going to grow. Otherwise, you're not going to throw money away, right? So there's a huge number of investment firms. Your favorite bank, Nubank, was invested by Berkshire Hathaway and SoftBank. So Mercado Bitcoin has been invested by SoftBank. So it's a clear indicator, at least for us on the ground, that there's promise in this industry. It's only a matter of time and a few things to unlock the full potential of this in a market such as Brazil.
So I was about to say that, what we're seeing there is extremely promising for financial infrastructure. And that is going to have a profound effect on the unbanked, which is, you said, some 60% of the population. It's an extraordinary number. And extraordinary to think that they actually might jump the entire traditional finance environment to go straight into to cryptocurrency and digital assets. So and that's going to have a cultural effect on on how Brazil sees themselves and how they operate and how they function. And I can't see it being anything but a positive cultural effect. But at the same time, you're a bit of a dichotomy, because you like music and you like drums and you like non-fungible tokens, I understand, and you've come from the banking industry, showing your human side, which is an extremely good thing. And and I thought I'd leave it across you. I mean, how are you participating in NFTs, and what's happening with NFTs in Brazil? I mean, one of the things that you think about with Brazil is you think about, color, fashion, passion, interest in creativity and art and street art, etc. Seems to me a great sort of broth of opportunity for that non-fungible token space.
Absolutely. So I think, full disclaimer, I am an oddball because I'm this mix of musician, heavily tattooed guy, skateboarder, and like banking person. So I know it's weird, so bear with me.
You have all the subcultures. You have the corporate culture, you have the music culture, you have the street culture, I'm do you cook too? I mean, do you cook as well? Like, are you a chef
no,
too?
but I certainly eat a lot. But the thing is, I sort of eat and drink from all these different scenes. So it's and I'm not representative of any of those. So it's my own weird perspective. But yes, I think being so culturally inclined as the Brazil culture is, there is a huge space for democratizing the access to capital from artists into their fan base. So we're seeing a number of startups trying to merge that. And it's interesting because artists, especially early on in careers, are sort of hostage to a financier. So here's $1 million and I own you for 5 years. You have to pay me back. So it's always an advance that sort of ties up with a lot of strings attached, and you can't do this, you have to do that. So it's concentrated because there are like few people who are big in the industry that do that, other than the majors, right? So it's borderline mafia in that space. So what we're seeing now is the ability for you to tokenize the advance that you would take from one of these mafia guys to your own fans. And you can, in return, get a cut of the royalties that are going to be emerging from the play, say on Spotify. So you have this circular economy where an artist wants to fund a new piece of work, a new track. They can go to the fan and say, hey, here, I need, 5,000 to do this track, or 60,000 to do a video clip that's going to kick ass. Do you guys want to join me? And I'll, share a cut of this. And the interesting thing, which is usually what we see in this space of sort of advance, is, okay, so this is a security. Well, remember that the Holly test requires you to be a security. It has to be something that it relies on the effort of others. But if you were a fan holding a token and you play the song on Spotify, you have direct influence on the result of that asset. So that's not a security anymore.
It's digital risk price asset management. So I have one burning question. I know we're almost running out of time. Is two things, right? All my travels to Brazil, it's one of my favorite countries, both in terms of food and diversity of the landscape. I've always been fascinated, and this has been famed stories in terms of subcultures and cultures coming out of the favelas, right? The music that comes out of it, the food that comes out of it. And I would imagine there's certainly a profound impact on this technology, because no longer the groups that are involved in music and that represents a certain sect of that subculture that's evolving, which has a beauty and poetry to it. Do you see there's a movement that you described that amassing the fan base, no matter where you are in Brazil, ability for them to raise funds, ability for them to get out of, ironically, the groups that are born because of that favela? Have you seen any success stories because of this that allows them to exit out of those things?
I think there are two projects that I think are sort of a hallmark in that space. One is the Favela Coin, which a group of favela programmers created. So they're issuing favela coins to for the issuance to raise capital and also to transact within the favela. So there's an internal microeconomy, which is also circular, happening within the space. So if they don't rely on the government-based currency and they have their own valuation of their microeconomy, well, they can be protected from, in general, more protected from the country's inflation. So that's one that I think it's pretty recent. I'm trying to get the guys to come to the show. So when I do, I'll let you know. That's going to be in Portuguese though. So that is one. And then in terms of the potential to propel startups that create social impact, there's the BVM12, which is a stock exchange for impact startups. So if you have, say, a startup, it's non-crypto, non-blockchain, it's a startup that does, say, solar electricity implementation for at low cost for marginal communities, and you do an IPO within this BVM12. It runs on blockchain, but the company doesn't have to be on. So you can issue your IPO and STO, whatever you want to call it, and you can raise capital to do your low cost solar panels for the communities within this particular stock exchange, which can only happen because the regulators are aware of the challenges in Brazil. So our SEC, which is CVM, it's the name of our SEC, is actively working on it. They have a regulatory sandbox for stuff like that. Central Bank also has a regulatory sandbox, and the insurance regulator, SUSEP, also has a regulatory sandbox. So everyone in their own space is trying to enable new things coming out of, the favelas or the university, or even, startups that emerge from, a couple guys drinking at the bar. So there is a real space for innovation in Brazil that's being promoted by the regulators. So I feel that we're pretty lucky in that regard, because not only we have the space to do this stuff, but we have the support from the regulators to do so. And I had this conversation once. I think especially in the central bank, we're so ahead of the curve comparing to our the peer countries, and they are a globally recognized regulator. The central bank in Brazil has
it does
good rap everywhere else. So
good people too. I've met them too.
Yeah,
really
very technical, very progressive. They go through the whole, like, being public servants and being a regulatory agency. It has their own challenges, but the people there are really good. So I think as you mentioned there, it's a weird combination. It really is a weird combination. We have a huge potential in like super talent, nature, and all that, and we have all these other challenges that sort of clash and sort of locks us. But slowly we're seeing ways out, and blockchain is certainly one of those.
Cool.
Well, I've got to say that's extraordinary, because here we are getting an insight into what's happening with Brazil. And like our concept of disintermediation of wealth, that can also be looked at on a macro scale, on a global scale, on a country-to-country based scale. And countries like Brazil, that may be a adopting this technology at a rapid rate, and with people enthusiastic to share their creativity and their passion for community, which is well known that Brazil is, it may well be a real facilitator of Brazil jumping ahead of its peers, as you say, but also jumping ahead towards the more developed countries as far as their economic metrics, and that's extraordinary. We've often heard that countries are prize fighters. I mean, sooner or later, the prize fighter is going to be beaten by someone else. And those fighting analogies is such that technology is going to give them that advantage. And it's not just technology relating to defense. It's technology of how their infrastructure works. And to be able to reflect that into, with the passion and culture of a country is just so extraordinary. I mean, where have we ever reflected that before? I mean, somebody brings out $1, it's not a reflection of the culture, it's just a payment system. That's right. But if you bring out digital assets, it can reflect the culture in the form of non-fungible tokens, and in the form of so many other startups which have smart contracts generating a methodology return, a service, something that reflects the attitude of the people. It's extraordinary to see that happening in Brazil. And I hope for our listening audience that it's just another snapshot example of a country that's doing amazing things with digital assets and cryptocurrencies. So today, strangely enough, Portal Asset Management is doing a podcast with a gentleman based in Shanghai.
Richard Turin. I think, Maurício,
Yes.
you may know him. He used to be an IBMer in Singapore. But now he's independent. He's an author. Yeah.
So part of the IBM network again. Good on you, Nitin. And so Richard's giving us perspective from China's point of view, and such a different culture, and how they're adapting their cryptocurrencies to that culture is so profoundly different to what we're doing in both Australia, in America, and in Brazil. And it's a great opportunity for listening audience to realize that this is not vanilla. This space is not vanilla. The topic is not vanilla. It is 1,000 flavors. And thank you very much for bringing the flavor of Brazil to us today, Maurício. It's been enormously appreciative. And I look forward to listening to your podcast, which is BlockDrops, that you put out each week for 5 minutes. I'll take the English version.
BlockDrops. And I'll tell you this, though, to talk about flavors, next time we meet, I love to have feijoada with you, which is my favorite thing in Brazil, which is always good. And again, Maurício, thanks for taking the time. And it's late in the evening. And as they say in Portuguese in Brazil, todo bem, obrigado.
Muito obrigado.
Okay.
Good on you, gents. Thanks, Maurício. Bye for now.
Bye, Maurício. Bye.
Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye.